You might have noticed that a new Superman movie came out. Maybe you like the story of Superman. One thing that's very interesting about him is this idea of a secret identity. By day, Superman is a mild-mannered reporter, but at a moment's notice, he's the city's protector. Clark Kent, affectionately called, that's a good name, isn't it? Clark Kent, the secret identity, lives a life between two worlds. On the one hand, he has his normal life, and on the other, his super life. And his greatest fear is actually that these two worlds would ever collide. Goes to great lengths to keep them separate. And he's constantly carrying this exhausting weight of trying to keep them apart. He believes it's necessary to protect the people that he loves and maintain some semblance of a normal life. But we as the audience, as we follow him, we see there's a great toil that it actually takes on him. Loneliness, compromise, the constant stress of having to live a fractured life. Well, we ourselves might not wear a cape, but at times we too are experts at living that double life of carrying a secret identity. Our two worlds are the sacred and the secular. The sacred consists of our Sunday self. We sing hymns, we listen to the sermon, we use all the right Christianese jargon. But then there's the secular self for every other day of the week. We live in our homes, we go to a job site, we enjoy leisurely activities, all with completely different sets of rules, values, and ambitions like what we normally would have in the sacred world. We build a wall between two worlds, and we live with this exhausting tension of keeping the two worlds separate. Now, I do not believe that is what honors God. The Apostle Paul writes, "I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God," which is your spiritual worship. When our faith becomes a secret identity, we fail to submit to every area of our lives to God's authority. And in the end, taking what this passage says, we end up compromising our worship as the people of God. Zechariah's listeners were a small, struggling community of exiles living under the authority of a foreign superpower in the form of Persia. They live with this constant tension between their public life and the secular Persian sphere and their covenant identity as God's chosen nation. The faith that they carried was not the law of the land. It was the religion of a simple minority, an occupied minority. Many of them, as a result, ended up just saying, you know what, I kind of like the culture around me. I like the lifestyle that Persia offers me. And they began to adopt many of the customs and priorities of the Persian people. And their secular lives were so disconnected from their sacred that they ended up forsaking the opportunity to rebuild the temple, the house of God, the central symbol of God's dwelling place with them. They put it off, they abandoned it, and Zechariah here brings a message intended to motivate them to get on their feet, shovel in hand, and finish the work, the opportunity that lays before them. In our passage here today, Zechariah offers a corrective to the sort of two worlds approach to faith, a fragmented faith. He does this by revealing a future time when Messiah would come, would establish his reign on this earth, and his reign would become so absolute, his judgment so final, his presence so pervasive, that every distinction between sacred and secular becomes erased, and all of life is immaculately, singularly dedicated to the praise of his glory. In this text, we're going to see three ways in which God will unify all things under Messiah's reign. Now, this is a forward-looking, future-looking message. But seeing the world as it will be should empower us to live our lives as we should right now. My hope is that today, as we look at these three ways in which God unifies all things under Messiah's rule, let us live in light of that coming victory, and let us heed the Apostle Paul's call, offer up ourselves as a living sacrifice, every last part of our lives unto God, which is our spiritual act of worship. The first way in which God will unify all things under Messiah is found in verses 9 through 11. God will unify all authority under Messiah, under Christ. God will unify all authority under Christ. Verse 9, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and his name one. This is an echo of the great Shema you might remember from earlier in the year. We looked at this passage. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. It signifies the removal of idols. There is but only one God that is worthy to be worshipped. No other God deserves that place. And here, I believe what Zechariah is declaring is there is coming a time where indeed the worship of Yahweh will be established as the one singular global religion. For us here right now, in this building, we are but one of many different faiths. This road is a testament to that, isn't it? Many different belief systems out there, and we, even in this country, cherish the fact that there's a freedom of worship, freedom to worship as we see fit, and that ends up resulting in, well, frankly, idolatry. There is coming a time when all of that will be eliminated. When Christ returns and he is king over all the earth, he will establish the worship of Yahweh, yes, the worship of him, as the one singular religion. Verse 10, the whole land shall be turned into a plain, from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. I said last week that some of you might have had a chance to go to Israel. You might know these places. I've never had a chance to go myself, alas. One day, maybe. But the north and south, the hill country surrounding Jerusalem. At this time, the prophet declares that hill country will be flattened. And instead, Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site, from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. Jerusalem will be elevated. As Dawn read earlier, the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and all the nations shall flow to it. A sort of symbolic portrayal of Jerusalem as the centerpiece, the central focus of the world, God's covenant nation elevated thereby. Verse 11, and it shall be inhabited, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. The fact that it's inhabited is significant. The audience at this time that Zechariah was speaking to, they came back to the land, but they may have actually had family members, they may have actually had friends who decided to stay put where they were at. They said, you know what, life is too good in Babylon. Life is too good in whatever other countries that they went off to. I'd rather enjoy my pagan life and not really worry about my calling as God's covenant people, so I'm going to stay put. And that has actually happened quite a bit throughout Israel's history. There has never been a true sort of ingathering of the Jewish people on such a widespread scale like what Zechariah sees in these verses and the ones we've already looked at. But here it says, everyone will return. All of the covenant people will come to the great capital city, will pour in, and they will be the covenant people that God has called them to be. They will be that kingdom of priests that they have been called to be. It says, Jerusalem shall dwell in security on that day. Did you know Jerusalem is arguably the most fought over city in all of history? It's been besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, captured and recaptured 44 times. Why? What makes the city so spectacular? Well, we can at least acknowledge the spiritual reasons for that. If this is the city that God himself has designated as his own, then Satan will not let that go idly by. But Jerusalem has been a holy city for three competing faiths. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem, you actually catch a glimpse of this. It is the holy city of the Jewish people, yes. For the Jewish people today who remain in unbelief, who do not accept Jesus as their Messiah, they have their own separate faith from Christians who see an even more greater significance here to this city. But then, of course, there's also Muslims who see the city as sacred for their own reasons. And here, the prophet Zechariah says that with the coming of Israel's king and the global institution of the worship of Yahweh, there will be no further jockeying for control of the holy city. In a chaotic foreign land, an embassy is one small patch of sovereign ground that belongs to another nation. Inside its walls, if you belong to that other nation, you are under the authority of your home country's laws. You are safe as long as you are inside the embassy. In a sense, this is what the church is for us right now. We belong to another kingdom. We belong to Christ's kingdom. And here we have a sort of secure outpost where we can gather in. Zechariah's promise is far greater, however. He describes a day when the entire world becomes what an embassy represents. No hostile territory outside the gates because, well, there's no more gates. Every square inch of the earth is secure, sovereign territory of King Jesus. And all competing claims to power are silenced by him, by the word of his mouth. His people will finally dwell in perfect safety under his single unifying authority. This is a message that really is of great comfort to us right now in light of the recent events in our country, and perhaps many more that are still to come. There is coming a time in which there will be so much peace. Micah declares, swords are beaten into plowshares. That is to say, warfare will be so foreign, we'll look at a weapon and we won't know what to do with it other than to farm. Until that day comes, we put our hope in what the prophet reveals here. Now, in verses 12 through 15, we actually see a hearkening back to what we looked at last week, when the warrior king, Jesus, appears. And there's some frightening things in these verses. Verse 12, this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples that wage war against Jerusalem. That word plague there is likely not chosen by accident. Yes, indeed, the same word used to describe the plagues that would fall upon Egypt, divine judgment issued by God. Here, the prophet reveals three very extraordinary plagues that will come upon the enemies of God. The first plague is physical decay, putrefaction, a fancy term there. Their flesh will rot while they are still standing on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. Sounds like something out of the Mummy. Didn't know there was a passage like that in our Bibles, did you? This extraordinary plague is promised to any who would come against Jerusalem, come against Messiah, the warrior king. In verse 13, we see another plague, confusion, pandemonium. On that day, a great panic from the Lord shall fall on them, so that each will seize the hand of another, and the hand of the one will be raised against the hand of the other. I can't help but my mind goes back to the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11. There you have a similar occurrence where all of the nations unite. They come together. They gather themselves against God. They disobey God. They pose themselves as an enemy or obstruction to God. And what does God do? He strikes them with confusion. Just as here, all of the nations unite against God, and they do this under the banner of Antichrist, as we saw in prior chapters. They unite together thinking that somehow they can overthrow Jesus, the great divine Messiah. And they are smitten with panic from the Lord. Even Judah will fight at Jerusalem. Now, does that refer to all of the inhabitants of Judah? It very well could. But the most important of all is the great Lion of the tribe of Judah. He will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be collected. The world is about to get plundered, and all of their gold, all of their silver, and the garments in great abundance shall be gathered under Messiah's kingdom. What's the third plague? Verse 15. And a plague like this shall fall on the horses, the mules, the camels, the donkeys, and whatever beasts may be in those camps. Animals that were otherwise domesticated, otherwise trained to carry out the great warfare. It's going to be as if they were never captured, as if they just were in the wild. They'll forget all their training. They'll lose their domesticated character. They will go mad. Great pandemonium, even for the animals, in verse 15. All this awaits the enemies of God who would rise up against him. And in the aftermath of this great moment, God will, here's your second point, unify all worship under Christ. God will unify all worship under Christ. Look at verse 16. Then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Booths. Year after year, they will go on a global pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I joke that I've never been to Jerusalem and I wish I could go. Well, in this particular moment, it would seem I'm going to be obligated to go, to behold our great King, to worship. The word there for worship, literally to bow down, to pledge allegiance to this King, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the armies, the commander-in-chief of heaven. That's what that expression means. And to keep the Feast of Booths. Now, those of you that were here on Thursday, you got a little sneak preview of this when we talked about the Feast of Booths. This was an actual time in Israel's history where they would live in booths or tents. Think of 4th of July, right? Sometimes in the 4th of July, of course, we set off fireworks. You ever wonder why we do that? I would like to think it's because the sound of the fireworks kind of is reminiscent of the warfare. It's a sort of reenactment of the Revolutionary War. Some people really go all out and they dress themselves up in funny clothing. Maybe they dress up like a founding father or like Uncle Sam or something like that. But it's a time of national observance, of something special for us as a nation. That's what the Feast of Booths was to the nation of Israel. A time of national observance. Israel would literally reenact living in tents as if they were wandering in the wilderness, making their way to the promised land. They would put up tents and they would stay in those tents. And they would remember the Lord's faithfulness to them as they are journeying in the wilderness. Why in the world would all of the nations be asked to observe this? Well, perhaps at this point, the nations likewise will be in a similar position. They will have a history of having lived in the wilderness, having wandered in the wilderness, having experienced such tremendous spiritual hardship. I dare say we are right now living in that sort of spiritual wilderness. It's tough. It feels as if there is no end in sight to man's evil. And yet we see these scriptures before us. We hear the promise of the coming kingdom, and we say, when? How much longer must we wait? How much more must we endure? It is a very difficult time for us, knowing what lies ahead, and yet not knowing when it's going to transpire. We are in that wilderness, but eventually the Lord will bring us to the promised land. And when that day comes, we will honor the Lord's provision, the Lord's faithfulness to us. Yes, right now, in this moment, as He provides for us the manna from heaven, as we will observe here in a few moments. We will commemorate this Feast of Booths, worshiping God, the great provider, the provider of this great kingdom, the ultimate promised land. Verse 17, and if any of the families of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there will be no rain on them. Go back to verse 8. No rain, not just the rain of water. There's no plants, there's no gardens. No, there will be no living waters. Remember, it was the living water that would come about at this time. It would come out of Jerusalem. It would make its way to the ends of the earth. The rain would actually bring with it living water, that therapeutic water that is beyond anything that we see here now. For those who do not worship, the punishment is they cannot enjoy the living waters, the physical living waters. Verse 18, and if the family of Egypt does not go up and present themselves, then on them there shall be no rain. There shall be the plague with which the Lord afflicts the nations that do not go up to keep the feasts of booths. It's not by accident that the word Egypt is used here, chosen as an example, perhaps symbolic significance. For 400 years, the Israelites were the servants of Egypt and Egypt's Pharaoh. Here, the prophet envisions Egypt will be the servant of Israel. And more importantly, Israel's king, Messiah, Jesus. It's a reversal of fortunes, unlike anything we've ever seen. After a fierce war, a victorious king demands tribute from the conquered nations. One interesting example of this in recent history is World War I. And remember the devastating punishment, reparations that were demanded of Germany from all of the European nations, and that ultimately drove us into World War II. Here, King Jesus doesn't demand tribute in quite the same way, a tribute that would only devastate the conquered nations. No, his vision is different. The tribute he demands is a pilgrimage. He summons every surviving nation to his city, not to strip them of their wealth, but to have them confess that he alone is the source of life, the one who gives rain. In that day, worship is no longer a personal preference offered in private. It is the unified public allegiance of all humanity. What a great time that will be. Well, lastly, verses 20 and 21, we see God will unify all culture under Christ. God will unify all culture under Christ. Verse 20, on that day there shall be inscribed on the bells of the horses, holy to the Lord. This signifies holiness in public life. The reason to have bells on the horses is to announce their arrival. Think of a merchant who is carrying something to announce that they have come into the land, to come into the marketplace. You might hear the bells. Well, those bells, it says, well, there shall be inscribed this expression, holy to the Lord. You keep going. And the pots in the house of the Lord shall be as the bowls before the altar. In other words, every pot that is inside the temple will be rendered sacred. There is no distinction between that which is unclean and that which is sacred. All of it is holy. Holiness in religious life. And every pot in Jerusalem and Judah, verse 21, shall be holy to the Lord of hosts. As we gather for our love feasts, we carry that food in the pots that we have, right? And we don't think anything of those pots, right? Week after week, we just put the food in. We eat it up. It's usually empty, Lord willing, by the end of the love feast. We take it home, we clean it, and we use it again. There's nothing sacred that we ascribe to that. Although I think an argument could be made that it becomes sacred by virtue of our using it for the Lord's service and love feast. But regardless, here the prophet says, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah, that is, Every last belonging that an individual might have in their household is rendered holy. What's the point? The prophet is looking forward to a day in which there is simply no further distinction between that which is holy and that which is unclean. There is no sacred secular split. It is all sacred because our King is here, because the glory of God dwells with us. And there shall be no longer a traitor in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day. It's interesting. Traitor, your Bibles might actually read Canaanite. That is literally the Hebrew word, Canaanite. Why Canaanite? Why traitor? Well, a Canaanite was an inhabitant in the promised land. They were historically known for being great merchantmen. And they were, if you go back to the book of Joshua, you can read about this. The Canaanites were an abomination before God. So much so that God commanded Israel their complete annihilation. It was a time in which God's holiness, the sacred, was compromised by the unclean. Here, the prophet says, there is no distinction between holy and unclean. There is no nation, no people that is characterized by evil that will serve as a blight on God's land. When an artist creates a masterpiece, they'll place their signature usually somewhere. It's usually in a corner in order to claim ownership of the whole canvas. But you think about what God stands to accomplish here. He is painting a portrait unlike anything that has ever been made. And God's final work, his signature, is embedded into the very fabric of the canvas itself. Perhaps the best way I know to describe this would be you take out one of those dollar bills, right? And you look up and you see the face of a founding father there. That's God's signature, if you will, etched into the canvas of the painting. Every brushstroke, every color of this beautiful portrait, it doesn't matter. You still see God's signature there. This is the prophet's vision. That signature reads, "Holy to the Lord," once reserved for just the high priests, for the elites, the special few in Israel's hierarchy. Instead, here it's inscribed on everything. Every piece of culture will be visibly and undeniably marked as belonging to the King. The exhausting work of living a double life will end finally on that day. God is coming. Jesus Christ is coming to tear down the wall. The wall, yes, that even we are guilty of building in our own lives between the sacred and the secular. He will do this by establishing his Son as the one true King. This future victory is not just a distant dream. Let it be our present motivation. Behold, I am coming soon. It's as if he is already on the way, and this future victory will soon be realized. Knowing this, let us reclaim every inch of creation, and let us begin living in that reality now. Take off the mask. Offer every pot, every business deal, every conversation you might have, offer it all to our great King, Jesus. All things will finally and forever be declared holy to the Lord.